Hello, and welcome to Samuel's Fortress. I'm your host, Kirill, and today we're going to be discussing the establishment of the Bulgarian identity within medieval Macedonia and within the First Bulgarian Empire. Now, what's important to know is that the Bulgarian Empire, like every other empire throughout history essentially, has a goal to unify or homogenize the various population groups that live within the empire's borders. Clearly, it's much easier to govern a population that is culturally homogenous, who speak the same language, who have the same religion, same customs, same culture, rather than trying to govern different ethnic groups who speak different languages, worship different gods, have different customs, and so forth. So, again, the goal of the Bulgarian Empire is to homogenize or unify the populations within its borders. In this case, the majority Slavic population and the minority Turkic Bulgar population. So, in the previous show, I discussed how Khan Boris managed to do this on a religious basis. I talked about how the pagan religion of the Slavs and the Tengrist religion of the Bulgars, those two religions were essentially destroyed by Boris as he managed to establish a Bulgarian church and to Christianize the empire, basically making the Slavs and the Bulgars Christians. So again, Boris managed to unify the various groups, Slavs and the Bulgars, within the empire into a common faith, that being the Christian faith under an independent Bulgarian church. Now, the other foundational block of a national identity, along with religion, is language. Religion and language, again, are the kind of the two historical foundations on which ethnic groups or national groups are based off of. So, again, he managed to Christianize the empire, and he also managed through the Ohrid and the Preslav literary schools, through the establishment of the Cyrillic alphabet, through the spreading of the Slavic language throughout the empire, to unify both the Slavs and the Bulgars under one language, one alphabet, that being the Slavic language, and under a single writing system, again, of Cyrillic. Now, the Bulgars obviously were on the losing end of the linguistic homogenization, and this, again, is simply due to the fact that the Slavs outnumbered the Bulgars quite heavily, and therefore it didn't make sense to homogenize the population around the Bulgar language. It was much easier to use Slavonic, Old Church Slavonic, as the grounds to unify the two groups of people linguistically. Now, I'm actually going to quote here because I think quote again from John Fine. The early medieval Balkans. Again, John Fine is a medieval history professor from the University of Michigan. I'm just going to quote from him directly in regards to this unification, because I think he does a very good job of describing what's going on here under the reign of Boris in this unification of these two groups of people in the empire. So, quote, At the same time, the Slavonic mission's activities contributed to the intensification of the Slavization of the Bulgars. By this time, after some 200 years of living together, the more numerous Slavs seem to have been well on their way to assimilating the Bulgars. The process had been gradual, but the final stages seem to have occurred under Boris. It may be partially attributed to his liquidating many leading Bulgar families after their revolt. Christianity also dealt a crushing blow to their customs and privileged position in the state. Furthermore, many Bulgarians of Bulgar origin, presumably by then, were speaking Slavic. The Bulgars had always been a relatively small group, and the number of people still speaking Bulgar would not have justified either a mission preaching in Bulgar or translations into that language. As far as we know, nothing was ever carried out along these lines. Thus, after the official conversion, the prestige of the Slavic language rose as it became the sacred text language, while the Bulgar declined, being irrelevant to the new religion. But though the Slavic was triumphing as the state language, the Bulgars could still be drawn into and identify with the national culture because this culture was not Slavic. For Boris made it a national policy to use the new doctrine of Christianity, which was neither Slavic nor Bulgar in origin, as a cement to bind the two peoples into a single culture. Until now, there had been a Bulgarian state in which lived Slavs and Bulgars, but there was no Bulgarian people. This Boris's policies created. By the end of the 9th century, with Christianity making a strong contribution, the Bulgarians had become a basically Slavic nation with an ethnic awareness that was to survive through triumph and tragedy, including 200 years of Byzantine rule from 1018 to 1186 to the present. After Boris's reign, the sources no longer distinguished between Bulgars and Slavs. Instead, they referred to Bulgarians. This name, despite its origin, came to signify the ethnically mixed population of Bulgaria, among whom the Slavic language triumphed. The Bulgar tongue died out, and modern Bulgarian retains less than a dozen words from it. Presumably, the use of the Slavic language, the employment of a Slavic clergy, and Boris's policies, which raised the Slavs to full membership in society, did much to win the Slavs' loyalty to the Khan and to his state, and thus make it a state with popular backing. Over 2 centuries, an enormous change is visible. In the 680s, the Bulgar Khans had been warrior chieftains leading bands of horsemen and nomads, primarily seeking grazing grounds and booty. By the 880s, he had become a Christian Slavic prince presiding over a settled state with defined territorial boundaries on the whole and having a nascent system of law and administration. So here, John Fine does an excellent job of describing how Boris, through the unification of the Slavs and the Bulgars through a common religion and through a common language, created the Bulgarian national identity. So again, you no longer have Slavs and Bulgars, you now have a unified state with Bulgarians living within it. And this includes the territory of Macedonia and the Slavic Macedonians. Now, you might be saying, I'm using John Fine a lot because I like his theories. I'm cherry picking quotes from John Fine. That's fine. So we'll just use A Concise History of Bulgaria by R.J. Crampton. R.J. Crampton is a professor of Eastern European history at the University of Oxford in England. So let's see what he has to say. Quote, Christianity was a watershed in the history of Bulgaria. Despite the many difficulties which it created, it did facilitate the merging of 2 constituent elements in the population. The Slavs could now more readily accept the state because it was Christian, and the Proto-Bulgarians had nothing to fear from Christianity because it was no longer divorced from the state and because it was no longer predominantly Slav or Greek. Thanks largely to the conversion, by the 10th century there were Bulgarians as opposed to Slavs and Proto-Bulgar subjects of the Bulgarian state. He goes on to say, quote, the introduction of the Cyrillic alphabet was of enormous importance. More than any other development, it prevented the absorption of the Bulgarians by the Greeks to their south and to the Franks to their west. It enabled the Bulgarians to create their own literature, which they did so with great rapidity. The new alphabet also facilitated the production of important secular texts such as legal codes, and without an alphabet, it is difficult to imagine how the Bulgarian state could have carried out administration in the Slavo-Bulgarian language. Above all, how the new alphabet enabled the Bulgarian church to use Slavo-Bulgarian as the language of the liturgy, and had it not been due to this, it would have been impossible for the Bulgarian church to escape total Greek domination. That Slavo-Bulgarian, or as we shall call it henceforth, Bulgarian, should become the language of the state and of the Bulgarian church, which was decreed by Assembly of Notables in 893. So again, here we have another source, an Oxford history professor who does, again, reaffirm the position that during the reign of Boris, we no longer have Slavs and Bulgars. We have a successful unification of these two groups into a common Bulgarian identity. Now, this is controversial to a lot of Macedonians who don't want to accept this. They like to look at the medieval history and see the Bulgars essentially dominating the Macedonian Slavs, exploiting them, stealing their history, and trying to create a division between Macedonian Slavs and Bulgarians, which, based on these two texts, does not exist. The Macedonian Slavs, again, were a disunified group of tribes which did not have any sort of national or ethnic consciousness or understanding. Again, they had a tribal understanding. They did not view themselves as a unified people. This unification comes under the reign of Khan Boris, in which the Slavs, including the Macedonian Slavs, as well as the Slavs in Thrace, in Mysia, and Dobruja, become unified and become Bulgarians. Now, what's interesting is that a lot of Macedonians don't like to hear this or to understand the ethnic or national understanding of the Slavs of Macedonia during the Middle Ages. They don't like to accept the fact that the Slavs at that time became Bulgarians. Now, what's interesting about this is that had it not been for the Bulgarian Empire and the Macedonian Slavs becoming Bulgarians, there would be no Macedonian Slavs today. It was briefly hinted there that the Bulgarian Empire saved the Slavs from Hellenization, from becoming Greeks. Now, we'll turn here to a history of the First Bulgarian Empire by the British historian Steve Runciman. Steve Runciman is a famous British historian, most notably known for his 3-volume set on the Crusades. And there's an interesting paragraph here from Runciman in his history of the First Bulgarian Empire, which sheds some more light on this topic. So he writes, quote, "The Macedonian Slavs were the most recent of the Khan's subjects, but they apparently had accepted the rule with pleasure. They were, however, difficult to govern and had joined Bulgaria as being the great Slav state, and so they might resent the rule of governors drawn from the old Bulgar nobility. Boris determined to bind them to his rule by means of Slavic Christianity. Christianity had barely yet reached their lonely valleys, but a desire for conversion was animating the whole Slavic world. Boris was bidding for their souls against the empire, the Byzantine Empire, his one political rival to the southwest, which only gave them Greek Christianity, wishing always to strengthen the Greek sections of the population. Then the Slavonic Christianity, firmly established in Macedonia, it could in time be introduced all over the Bulgarian dominion. The Greek clergy at present, so useful, should be one by one replaced by Slavs, till at last the Khan's old dream should be realized. The Bulgar lords would be swamped in the sea of Slavdom, and the Khan would rival the emperor in Byzantium, and should rule a great empire bound like his with 2 strong bonds, a common faith and a common language." So what Runciman's saying here is that the Byzantines were attempting to Hellenize the Macedonian Slavs, and this process was halted and stopped by Khan Boris, by the establishment of Slavic Christianity in Macedonia by the First Bulgarian Empire. So if you recall from a previous video, I think 2 videos ago, 2 or 3 videos ago, we had a video entitled Slavic Invasion of Macedonia Part 2. And in that video, I described how the Slavs who had managed to conquer Greece were Hellenized by the Byzantine Empire. So the Slavs, through administrative and religious missions by the Byzantines, lost their Slavic identity and essentially became Greeks over time under Byzantine administration. And this was the goal of the Byzantine Empire in Macedonia. Had Khan Boris not stopped this, had the Bulgarian Empire not occupied or invaded Macedonia, the Byzantines would have Hellenized Macedonia, and there would be no Macedonian Slavs today. We, as Macedonian Slavs, would be speaking Greek. We would have been thoroughly Hellenized like the Slavs in Thessaly, in the Peloponnesus, and throughout Greece. And this is why Runciman states that the Macedonian Slavs, accepted Bulgarian rule with pleasure, because what that meant was that their Slavic identity would be protected by the Bulgarian Empire, and they would not be Hellenized by the Byzantines. So again, we have a common history here with the Bulgarians, with the Bulgarian Empire. We were a unified people who had a common language, a common culture, lived under the same state, and this distinction between Macedonian Slavs and Slavs in Bulgaria is irrelevant at this point. There is a unification of the Slavs along with the Bulgars under the Bulgarian Empire and the establishment of the Bulgarian identity. Now, again, I'll refer here to John Fine, who summarizes this very well. He writes, quote, "Until the late 19th century, both outside observers and those Macedonian Bulgarians who had an ethnic consciousness believed that their group, which is now two separate nationalities, comprised a single people, the Bulgarians. Thus, the reader should ignore references to ethnic Macedonians in the Middle Ages, which appear in some modern works. In the Middle Ages and into the 19th century, the term Macedonian was used entirely in reference to a geographical region. Anyone who lived within its confines, regardless of nationality, could be called a Macedonian. Nevertheless, the absence of a national consciousness in the past is no grounds to reject the Macedonians as a nationality today." And I am not rejecting the Macedonians as a national identity today. As I stated in the first video of this channel, there will be a whole second series of videos discussing Macedonian history from the 19th through the 21st century, and it will describe how the modern Macedonian identity takes shape. However, just because there's a Macedonian identity today does not mean there was one in the Middle Ages. There was not a Macedonian identity in the Middle Ages, and like John Fine says here, any such reference should be ignored. Now, what he's talking about when he's talking about these modern references to a medieval ethnic Macedonian identity is things like this. This is a history of the Macedonian people published by the Institute of National History in Skopje in 2008. This is a lengthy text that is essentially the state, the official state history of the Republic of Macedonia, today the Republic of North Macedonia. And in here we see these revisionist theories about ethnic Macedonians in the Middle Ages, about a continuity between the ancient Macedonians and the modern Macedonians. Again, this is a pseudo-history that is, we'll get into in the series of videos, you know, in the 19th, 20th, and 21st century of why this is being done. I don't want to get into that now too much. But again, this pseudo-history is being put forward, especially in the last 20 to 30 years. And this is what John Fine is referring to when he's talking about these modern references to medieval Macedonian ethnicity. And I'll just turn here to a page I have tabbed. This is really what he's talking about. Stuff like this. The creation of the medieval state in Macedonia. And if you see here, section 1 of this chapter states, the uprisings against Bulgaria and Byzantium and the creation of the state. So here we have these, again, there's no references within this text, I should say. There's really no reference or citation to anything. It kind of reads like state propaganda. But these, this is a claim. If you want to read this, you can. I mean, it's quite lengthy. You can find this for free online. I found the PDF online. This is in English, so you don't have to read Macedonian to understand this. Again, this is in the English language. These theories posit that there was an independent medieval Macedonian empire that was at war with both the Bulgarian Empire and the Byzantine Empire, that the Macedonians were separate from the Bulgarians, that there was no common history between the Macedonian Slavs and the Bulgarian Slavs. Again, these theories are found nowhere outside of these types of revisionist texts. You're not going to find anything like this in any work outside of Macedonia. It's not historical. It's essentially, again, I hate to use the word, but it is essentially propaganda. There's no historical basis for these claims of an ethnic Macedonian identity in the Middle Ages. In the Middle Ages, the Macedonian Slavs, under the rule of Khan Boris, became Bulgarians, and that identification stuck until the 19th century, in which, again, we'll discuss in subsequent videos how a separate Macedonian consciousness formed. And again, we're not denying that a separate Macedonian consciousness or an ethnic identity exists today, but we have to be honest, in the Middle Ages, it did not exist. In the Middle Ages, we were Bulgarians, and there's really no getting around that if you're going to look at history objectively. So That's the Bulgarian identity in medieval Macedonia in the First Bulgarian Empire. In the next video, we'll be discussing Tsar Samuel and his rule of the First Bulgarian Empire. So until then, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time.